Hello everybody and welcome back to the Fantasy Football Scout YouTube channel. It's the day of the Premier League fixtures. They're out. The Premier League fixtures are out. And it's always a sort of highlight between the end of the last season and the new season coming up is the Premier League fixtures, because it's when I feel like it's the start of the FPL season, really, in my opinion. You start to get a look in, you start to look at fixture swings, you start to look obviously at the best options for each individual game weeks, because of course there is certain times when certain players are fantastic, but they're not fantastic because they've got a run of Man City and Arsenal and Liverpool all in a stretch of three. So you might have wanted them, but maybe you don't want them for that run, and that's why the fixtures are so important, and that's why I think you can start building a bit of a sort of you can just have a look at where you're going to be and what sort of times in the season you're going to want what, and to target certain different teams. And of course as well, we are going to obviously be looking at the Fantasy Football Scout fixture ticker, which is available on the Fantasy Football Scout website, so you can check that out. I will leave a link in the description if you do want to check it out. But obviously, we are going to be sort of having a look at that today and looking at what that reveals to us fantasy managers, and see what we can learn from it. Of course, well, if you could, because if you are new to the channel, if you're not new, if you could drop the channel by dropping a like and subscribe, that would be absolutely fantastic. It massively helps it and boosts it up for people who are also interested in the fixtures. And finally as well, we had to do a sort of instant match reaction spaces earlier, which has gone out now as a podcast. If you do want to check that out as well, that is available on all on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You get the idea. It's probably there. You can probably find it. But yeah, let's get in and have a look at this fixture ticker, and have a look at what the learnings are from the Premier League fixtures. So here they are then. This is the fixture ticker for next season. Obviously, this is just the first 6 weeks. Obviously, already though, if you do want to have a look at the fixture ticker for the whole of the 38 games, you can do. But we are just going to look at the sort of the first 6 game weeks. So the first thing you can probably learn from this is that Sunderland are quite comfortably the strongest. They in terms of fixtures, they have the best fixtures. So in terms of a learning, I think looking at potentially some Sunderland options might just work. And the other thing to mention as well, when I've looked further on, is that actually Sunderland have a really good run of fixtures for a long period of time. I think they've got a really good run of fixtures until about game week 11. So they are going to be long holds. So the likes of Trey Hume, I think, in defence could be a really interesting option at maybe 4.5 million or 4 million if you do want a sort of budget defender. The likes of Dan Ballard potentially as well, scored a few goals from set pieces last year for Sunderland, did obviously score in the playoff semi-final as well. So he could be a really good option. So Sunderland assets, I think, a budget straight away could be a shout out. And then on the reverse side, if we're talking about how good Sunderland assets are, look at Arsenal and Newcastle. They are in a bit of a state at the start of the season. Look at that. Obviously, Arsenal have got Man United away on the first game. Then they've got Leeds at home, so potentially a bit of sort of a saving grace there for Arsenal in terms of a fixture run. So I think Saka obviously is going to be a really strong captain, obviously, in game week 2 against Leeds. And then they've obviously got Liverpool away in game week 3, followed by Nottingham Forest at home. Then they've got Man City, and then they've got Newcastle. So that Arsenal run, if you were considering like a double Arsenal defence, which I'm sure a lot of people were, naturally they have got a really strong defence. They've had a strong defence for the last few years. It wasn't quite as strong last year as it was the year before, but they have got obviously a strong defence. So the likes of Gabriel, Saliba obviously massively picked, potentially Timber. Do you want to hold off on the Arsenal? Sort of players, because again, if you look at even a defensive standpoint, just from the defence, which is something you can do as well, they are third bottom for the defensive numbers and the defensive, what you would expect from the defence based on the fixtures they have had. So do you want to look at that? Is that something to mention? Because obviously these defenders are not going to be cheap from Arsenal, and I think that's a standpoint throughout. Really, one thing I have learned is that for the first few game weeks, the premium defenders are going to be really hard to come by. There's a few decent options like Chelsea's run, if you can see there, they've all the sort of top 6. They've got a really strong run. As you can see, they start with Crystal Palace, West Ham, Fulham, Brentford, Man United, and Brighton. Another thing to mention with Chelsea as well, when you look at the attack, so this is just based on just based on the attacking numbers. They are top, with obviously Villa second. So again, obviously the likes of Liam Delap could be a really, really interesting shout early on. I think Cole Palmer obviously could be a really interesting one, but then obviously you whip it up. Are you going to want Cole Palmer early on, because you're probably going to want Saka if you're going to captain him against Leeds, obviously, in that game down there as well, for game week 2. So there is some already. You see, there's interesting questions that are getting brought out with the fixtures, and then again, I think the likes of an Ollie Watkins could be a really interesting shout. Obviously, before the season, you might go Ollie Watkins versus or an Isak like we had last year. I think Isak will be obviously more expensive than Watkins this year. But with Newcastle's fixtures, do you want to go there with an Isak, or would you like to start with an Ollie Watkins with their sort of much more favourable run from an attacking standpoint? However, of course, you're probably not just going to want to double sort of have the whole of the Sunderland team in the first sort of 6 games. Maybe some Sunderland fans will, but obviously they're probably not going to. So you can look on a sort of relative basis, which I think is really important in FPL, which is sort of looking at. And then some of the learnings from this obviously is that actually for how good a team is, obviously this is relative to how good a team is, so you can then see a bit more in terms of, so as you can see now, Sunderland predicted to be 4th bottom in terms of where you'd expect actually, based on how good they are and how good their fixtures are, and then of course Liverpool to the top. So instantly you're thinking Salah's got to be a pick, I think, from game week 1. So yeah, that this is something to definitely mention. And obviously it looks like Man City obviously are going to be strong as well. Arsenal, even though as we talked about, the fixtures do look poor because of how good Arsenal are, you would still expect some of their assets to be really, really strong options. So yeah, that is the current situation. So a few learnings from this anyway. If we sort of go back to the difficulty side, because this is the one I like, because it gives us sort of more of an imprint. If you're looking at the fixtures and who's got the best fixtures, and sort of in captaincy for each individual game, I think for sort of game week 1, it's going to be Salah. I think Salah against Bournemouth, when I look at it, looks like the strongest fixture on paper for me to go get a haul. I think if you went away from that, I think the Spurs game against Burnley. Could you go with a Solanke to be rogue? Could you go with a Jared Bowen of West Ham when they face obviously Sunderland? I think they're probably the strongest 3. When I look at it in game week 1, again, if you're building a sort of consensus of which sort of players you're going to pick in, obviously as well, Haaland against Wolves could be a really good shout as well. In game week 2, obviously I think the main one that people are going to point to is probably, like I mentioned, Arsenal playing against Leeds United. Obviously my team, so I am gritting my teeth while saying this, but I've got to admit that that's obviously going to be a good fixture on paper. Leeds going to the Emirates, so the likes of Saka could be a really good option. Havertz, potentially the new striker that bring in. Will it be Gyökeres? Will it be Sesko? They could be really decent shouts as well in game week 2. Into game week 3, I think this is where it's a bit tricky. You could go again against Leeds with Newcastle assets, who obviously got Leeds, so you could go with an Alexander Isak there. I think it's potentially a decent option. Or if you've got maybe a Brentford asset, if this is still there, they play Sunderland at home, that could be a really interesting game. Or if you want to go for a Man United asset, you could go with like a Bruno Fernandes against Burnley. For me, they're probably the standout games. Also as well, obviously Salah's naturally going to be a pick most weeks, like he was this year. That could be an option as well. Or you could do like Haaland against Brighton. You could do Haaland against Spurs as well if you wanted to. Obviously that didn't end well for me last year when I did that, and I believe Spurs won 4-0 in that game. So maybe don't do that again this year. In terms of game week 4 for captaincy, for me there's one that stands out massively when we look earlier on now, which is that you're going to need Salah as the captain against Burnley away in game week 4. I think that's probably the best one. If you do want to go away from that, obviously Crystal Palace playing against Sunderland could be quite interesting. Potentially a full asset against Leeds, or he's going to be Salah against Burnley. Let's be honest. I think you're going to need him. So a few things that when I'm looking in my head, thinking earlier on, Salah is going to be needed in game week 1 because obviously that Bournemouth fixture, he's got the best fixture, and obviously you're going to need him for game week 4 as well. I think a lot of people are going to go with Salah, but something to bear in mind. Moving on to game week 5, I think the strongest one here is probably there's a few ones. Like one I quite like on this one. If you like I mentioned, if Ollie Watkins does become a really decent option, they play Sunderland in game week 5, which could be I think a really really decent shout. When we look down as well, a lot of teams obviously played each other with, but again. Liverpool playing against Everton, you'd expect Salah to be a really strong captaincy again in game week 5. And then moving on to game week 6, which is where we'll wrap this part up with the fixtures, is I think Man City against Burnley looks a really strong way to go at. So obviously the likes of Erling Haaland, that looks like the pick out of the fixtures for game week 6 as such. So that's sort of where I'm at with captaincy right now. Yeah, so Salah's going to dominate a lot of the captaincy. Obviously, it looks like for game week 1, game week 4 and game week 5, he's probably going to be the strongest pick there, with potentially Haaland obviously looking like a really strong pick in game week 6 as well. So that's something to look at. Another thing to look at as well, I like to look at the defence and see where teams are at with the defence. So there's a few teams that I think could be quite interesting early on, and obviously the Notts Forest defence. When we look at that, there is a sort of post that was done today about the Notts Forest defence, as you can see there, which is really interesting. Obviously, like it mentioned on the ticker, they've got Brentford, they've got Palace, they've got West Ham and Burnley and Sunderland in the first 6. So the likes of Matt Sells, obviously, he was a high-scoring goalkeeper last year. The likes of an Olaena looks like a really decent option. The likes of course, Mikolenkovic was a really strong option. So that could be something definitely to go at, to look at in your first sort of few games. Definitely the sort of Notts Forest defence. Obviously, touching upon Salah as well. The guy has never blanked in game week 1 as well, so something to bear in mind in terms of the captaincy for him. Potentially, on the Friday the 15th of August, which will be the first game, obviously, they do play Bournemouth at home, so, maybe go there. The other thing to mention as well, in terms of tweets that we've looked at today, Chelsea's run, as we talked about, looks really strong. And I think, in terms of Chelsea, there is going to be a question, because the premiums are going to be massive. And Parma, we know, ended the season relatively poorly. Obviously, did well, I believe, in the Conference League. Obviously, sort of grabbed the game by the scruff of the neck, came up with them 2 assists, which obviously they then went on to win quite comfortably in the game. So maybe we'll take that and obviously see how he gets on the Club World Cup. He has just blanked, having seen obviously in the first game against LAFC. So again, maybe the form is not quite where we hope it would be. But in terms of them, I think if you're looking at Saka Parma, which I think they're obviously going to be an interesting price point, I do think Parma is potentially the one, because one thing I didn't mention when I go back to the ticker, obviously, in game week 3, is that actually Chelsea play Fulham at home in game week 3. And when we talked about game week 3 being a sort of a potential harder week for captaincy, I do think Parma could be really good at captain in game week 3. So if you can get through game week 2 without Saka, I do think then Parma, with this fixture run, obviously, of Crystal Palace, West Ham, Fulham, Brentford, Man United away, Brighton at home, he could be a really good option. And of course, as well, Delap looked pretty good when he came on against LAFC. Obviously picked up the assist for the second goal as well, so he's already underway. I think he could be a really strong option. Obviously got 12 goals in that Ipswich team yesterday. Obviously, there could be an issue with the rotation with Jackson, but he could be a really good option. And of course, Cucurella, because if you, again, anyone that watches Chelsea, which I'm sure all of you do, the places that Cucurella finds himself picking up for Chelsea is just absolutely remarkable. Like, he almost plays in the number 10 role. He's a bit like sort of Postecoglou's fullbacks, really, where they've sort of opted that number 10. He does enter the box slot as well. He scored a few decent headers last year as well, as we know later on, and obviously got that goal against Man United, which was massive in their Champions League run last year. So Cucurella, I think, as well, the price point of probably, 5.5, something like that it'll be at. He could be a really good option. Obviously, as we talked about, Chelsea, their fixtures are so strong because of all the top 6 teams, as we looked at again, if we go back to the ticker. If you look overall, of all the top 6 teams, Chelsea have the strongest fixtures. I think Villa are definitely someone to look at as well, and Forest, but Chelsea do have the strongest fixtures over the 6. One other thing that you can look at as well in the ticker, if you are interested, is that, which is one of my favourite features. Obviously, a lot of the time we've got, like last year, obviously I did a game week 34 free hit, which I think is really important. But I didn't need players for that game week 34 free hit, and you can actually on the Scout website you can actually delete a week, so it deletes them fixtures, and you can look at the fixtures based without that week included, which is a really important tool. So yeah, that's something to bear in mind as well. That you can, if you have got if you are planning a free hit early on, which I know a lot of people do, get rid of that fixture and then look based on that fixture not existing. So who's got the best run if you discount that fixture. You can also as well, if you do, because these are our current sort of, if you go down to custom down here, these are based on what are based on a number of metrics which I've seen the FDR to create this. This is obviously based on our statistics where each team comes to. But if you do think, for example, that Leeds, like I probably would, are slightly better than they are, you can move Leeds up to say they're about here on the FDR. So it sees obviously it's now, rather than being 1050 like Burnley and Sunderland, if you think Leeds are stronger, you could move Leeds up, and then of course that will be reflective when you actually then type in and press reflective and difficulty, that you will see a change based on these different sort of requirements that you're putting in, or these are basically statistics that decide what makes a good fixture and what makes a poor fixture. So if you don't think these are quite right and you want to change it, which I know people do, because people think that they're obviously. There might be a Liverpool fan who thinks they're even better than they are, or maybe you're a Man City fan who thinks that again they're better than they are, or worse, and you can sort of alter the FDR as you would like to suit. And this is based on underlying numbers, but if you want to suit something and you think that actually Spurs are going to be much stronger this year because no Postecoglou anymore, you could move them up as well, and you can change anything, and then of course that will change the outcome of your season ticker. But yeah, that's one thing to mention. Another thing to mention is that, yeah, so the main learnings I've got anyway from the ticker is that if you want a budget player, Sunderland look like a really good option. Maybe avoid Arsenal and Newcastle early on because of their poor fixtures. Chelsea look the strongest of the top six, so I think a triple up there could be quite interesting. Man City, I think, look quite strong as well when you look through. So yeah, there is a number of factors, but it's just so exciting looking at all this, because it starts the whole train of the FPL season, really. But yeah, that is the fixture ticket. And of course, as I said, if you want to check it all out in the description below, the top link will be a link so you can sign up and obviously see this in full. And you can obviously change this. So I've currently got it on 6. If you want to just look at the first 5, for example, you can minus it off, and then you've just got the first 5 fixtures as well. So you can have a look at that. There's loads to get into. You've got overall, attack, defense, and then your ratings as well. So yeah, it's a fantastic tool. But not just that, I hope you enjoyed the video, of course, as well. And yeah, thanks all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the ticker. I hope you got something from this information as well from this video. You can have a look and start building your teams as well. But yeah, thanks all for watching, as always. And we'll catch you on the next one, everybody. Bye, everybody. Bye for now.